Dear friends, welcome to my 19th Thought for the Week during lockdown. This week I want to reflect on Jesus' saying, I am the bread of life. In Exodus chapter 16, we have the account of when the people of Israel had escaped from Egypt, and their leader Moses, whom they trusted, was taking them to the land which God had promised them, a land where there would be plenty of good things for them to eat. But to get there they had to travel through the desert and wilderness, and this took them many years. They'd been so focused on getting away that nobody had really given much thought to the logistics of travel. While they were certainly more prepared to survive in the desert than you and I would be. Just think about the enormous and overwhelming issues related to leading a whole nation of people with all their animals and children and possessions out into the desert and camping. In fact, at times life was very hard and sometimes food was scarce and they were hungry. At these times they felt Moses had let them down and wished they were back in Egypt, although they were treated like slaves in Egypt and had to work extremely hard. At least they had sufficient to eat and didn't suffer the pangs of hunger in their stomachs. One day when they were in the wilderness, the people were really fed up, or rather the trouble was they weren't fed up. They had endured a long and tiring journey and they were hungry. There wasn't much food. How were they going to manage? But then God told their leader Moses that they shouldn't worry, for God would provide for them. During the night he would give them manna, and in the morning they would be able to collect it up and cook it so that it would become like bread or cake. And it happened just as they had been told. During the night manna did indeed fall to the ground, and when they woke up in the morning they discovered the ground had been covered with something like frost or snow. That was God's manna, and when they cooked it into small loaves, they found there was enough for everyone. No one went short, and no one had too much. There was sufficient to go round. God had given them bread to eat. Nobody knows what manna actually was. It's described in other parts of the text as tasting like flour with honey or bread with oil. Its name, tradition says, comes from the colloquial expression the Hebrews used, something like manhu, which meant, what is this? Their experience reminded them that man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord, in Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 3. And later Jesus also repeats this in Matthew chapter 4 verse 4. Many years later in John chapter 6, something similar happens. This time crowds of people had followed Jesus into the countryside, and Jesus taught them many things, and by the time he had finished, it was getting late, and the people were beginning to get hungry. The disciples urged Jesus to send the people away to the farms and villages round about, so they could buy themselves some food. But Jesus didn't think that was a very good idea. Instead, he told them to discover what food they had among them, among the people. They went and found out and returned to him, saying they had found a boy who did have some food. Yes, he had 5 loaves and 2 fish. Then Jesus made all the people sit in rows, and taking the loaves and the fish, he said grace, then broke the bread, and the disciples shared it among the crowd. He did the same with the fish. The hungry people were given food and gladly ate whatever was given them. At the end, there was even some left over, just as God had provided for Moses and the hungry people in the desert. So now, through Jesus, God provided food for the hungry people in the countryside, and he continues to feed us daily. In John chapter 6, not long after the feeding of the 5,000, a crowd had caught up with Jesus on the other side of the lake and asked, "What sign then will you give that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our ancestors ate the manna in the wilderness, as it is written. He gave them the bread from heaven to eat, and he said to them, Very truly I tell you, it is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is the bread that comes down from heaven and gives life to the world." "Sir," they said, "always give us this bread." Then Jesus declared, "I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry, and whoever believes in me will never be thirsty." I'd now like to move on a few months, and instead of thinking of Jesus with a large crowd of people far away from anywhere, we see him now with a small group of disciples in an upstairs room in a house in Jerusalem. Jesus knew it would not be long before he would be betrayed, then arrested, and be put on trial, and finally be crucified by these same people who had followed him and been fed by him in their time of need. He was very anxious to have one last meal with his disciples, so he had made arrangements for a room to be prepared for them so they could have dinner together. It was a rather elaborate meal with several courses, just like the Passover meal some churches have during Easter. At one point, Jesus did something very special. He took bread, probably the size of a small bread roll. Once again, he gave thanks to God. Then he said that this bread was like his body. He then broke it and said, just as the bread is broken, so his body was going to be broken. And he shared the broken bread with his disciples. Jesus took a loaf of bread and gave it a new and special meaning. From then onwards, taking and breaking a small loaf of bread was to be the reminder of the life of Jesus. It was to be a way of remembering all that Jesus was, all that he had said, and all that he did. And so ever since, Christian people have used bread and wine in this special way. Each time we celebrate communion, we give thanks to God for all his goodness, for the ways in which he provides for us and cares for us, and for giving us food to eat. In the breaking of bread, we bring to mind the life of Jesus, perhaps remembering how he fed that large crowd of people with bread and fish, or how Cleopas and his companion recognized him when he broke bread, when they encountered Jesus during the road to Emmaus appearance in Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 32. As we eat the bread together, our friendship with Jesus is renewed, and we know we have eaten the bread which he gives. So we thank God because he gives us bread to fill our hungry stomachs. We thank him too because God gives us the bread of life to nourish our Christian faith and remind us that we cannot live by bread alone. Let us pray. We thank you for the bread of life and ask you will help us to be like the little boy who shared his fish and loaves. Open our eyes and help us to see you in the world today, and where there is a need for those who need the bread of life in their lives, and those who just need some food in their stomachs. Help us to share what we have in abundance. Amen. This week, if you can, identify ways in which you can share the bread of life with those you meet or speak to. So until next week, keep safe and keep well. Shalom, my friends. Shalom.